Hello friends and welcome to episode 218 of the Noclip podcast. It's not a Crewcast today. We have let the boys take the week off. They're off enjoying themselves, playing some video games. God knows what they're doing. I haven't a clue what they're doing. But I know what Ben Hanson is doing. Ben Hanson from MinnMax. He's here with me to have our, I guess, let's call it a Patreon manager reunion or support group. I'm not quite sure.
Support group, I think, is the key way to phrase it. I feel like there needs to be more of this because the couple of times we have talked, it feels like you can just go on forever about everything that's stressing you out, everything that's wonderful, the entire world of Patreons. It's a fun whirlwind, man.
Exactly. So why not do it in public? That's what I say.
Absolutely. Honestly, every time we have a private conversation, I'm like, this is a waste. What a waste of time just looking at each other's faces. We could be sharing this information with the world and come across like weird, paranoid weirdos to the public and the masses, you know?
It's funny. I was talking, I think it was Jesse last week was making a joke about, I think it was on one of the most recent MinnMax podcaster videos where they were talking about, you guys were talking about, we should just get together and play a game. And then you were like, well, we'll have to like record it. Why wouldn't we record? We got to make content. We have to make content.
You don't want to be that person. You never want to be the person in the room saying this could be content. But I think what's tough is like, you got to always remember that weird idea of like, okay, there's a lot of people supporting us on Patreon and it's nice to keep them in the loop. You don't want to get, too bizarre on the parasocial front, but every time like I'm getting lunch or breakfast or dinner with somebody from the MinnMax crew, it's like, if we just set a recorder out right now, this conversation would be 95% the same. And isn't it a shame not to invite those people who are in theory enjoying our interactions? And that's the type of brain worm that you can't get rid of,
Yes, that's why we have this support group. I feel exactly that way as well. So we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff today. We're going to talk about MinnMax the past 5 years coming up on. Is it coming up on 6? Coming up, 5.5. Yeah. We're going to talk about the games coverage world. I guess it's interesting situation we find ourselves in, and a bunch of other stuff too. But for folks who don't know MinnMax, I feel like the Venn diagrams on Noclip and MinnMax are probably pretty close. But for folks who don't know what MinnMax is, what's your little elevator pitch when you're at Thanksgiving and your cousin's new boyfriend turns up and you have to tell them what you do for a living? What do you say?
Yeah, podcast about video games. And then they say, oh, I'm really into Slay the Spire. And then I'll try and pretend that I can dive in the weeds on every specific video game. And then they're always disappointed by how little I know about the game that they're specifically obsessed with, But for the elevator pitch, MinnMax is a place about games, friends, and getting better. Formed in 2019. So I was at Game Informer before that, starting in 2010 at Game Informer.
For 9 years, right?
Yeah. As their first video producer. And then Jason A. Stryker came on as the video editor like a year after I started on that fun stuff.
Excellent.
But so was there at Game Informer for 9 years. And then in 2019, there were some brutal layoffs from GameStop. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna leave. I feel safer trying to go the independent path and trying to piece something together than staying under this roof and waiting for GameStop to collapse in on us. And then the joke was on me because Game Informer lasted until 2024. So, it went on so much longer than I expected. And it was amazing what that team was able to put together and, put out there in the world. So then we launched the Patreon MinnMax with 2 N's in honor of Minneapolis, Minnesota, I guess, which is where we're based out of because of the Game Informer connection. And so got together some folks who were let go from Game Informer in those layoffs. And then we've been kind of slowly growing ever since. And the overall idea is to create an outlet that's smaller, smarter, and more sustainable. Something that's built to last for the future.
And you say growing. I mean, you've been growing in pretty much every feasible way. I mean, growing in terms of the amount of content you guys produce. You just launched Pew Pew Bang, I think, a week or two ago, the latest podcast with all the ladies who work for MinnMax, or at least a bunch of them. The crew's gotten bigger. The amount of people who are the amount of mouths to feed. That's where my brain goes. The stress of making sure that everyone's doing okay. And like I said, sorry, your Patreon numbers as well. Like I think we talked privately about this a couple of months ago, but like it's super inspiring to see the type of growth you have. It's like steady and upwards, which is, I think, the dream of any Patreon creator, and it's been hard fought and hard earned too.
That's very sweet. Thank you. Yeah, it is weird how much I look at that Graphtreon graph and just watch it and be like, okay, every time I'm stressed out, every time there's a little stress on the home front, and I feel like I should be spending more time with friends and family, it's like, oh, it's all just for the sake of watching this graph. It's just, in no other industry, well, there's probably some other comparisons, but it's just so bizarre to be like, oh, the last 5.5 years of my life, here's a graph representing every good or bad decision and how much effort you've put into it. Yes. It's kind of gross in a way, but yeah, we've been super, super lucky since launching. Yeah, where we've just been consistently climbing. And it's, it's like we've talked about it. It's such a scary feeling because people are dropping out all the time from Patreon.
Right.
And I have this feeling of like, okay, if I could just lock it in where we're at right now, I would do that for the next 10 years. No problem. I'm not one of these people who's hell-bent on growth, but at the same time, if you're not constantly pushing a little bit to try and grow, you'll start collapsing in on yourself like a black hole, and the community will eat itself alive, and that'll be the end of it. And so it is just this weird feeling of, I guess we have to keep pushing, and that's the tension then of keep pushing, keep creating exciting things, but at the same time, not just getting into that trap of let's do more and more and more. Let's set up a bunch of other treadmills for us to run in place on and create more content and create more audience expectations. And then we're going to burn ourselves out and we're all going to end up hating each other. So like, what is that right level of how much the community needs to stay excited, feel like that the support of this outlet is worthwhile, but at the same time, making sure the team is happy and always reminding ourselves that like we can slow down a bit. Above all else, the community wants us to stay sustainable. And if we do 6 podcasts a week and we end up being bitter about it, that's terrible. So we can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think like I take similar sort of lessons from the folks around us or the folks who've come before us as well, where, some of our favorite sites or favorite, communities where either too much work happened or people split off and did their own thing, and it's you don't want to. That's one of the fears I always have, is that I always want to make sure that everyone who did any work for Noclip over the years feels good about the time they spent working on Noclip stuff, which is its own sort of its balancing act. Do you do the thing? I mean, you must do, where you like go look at everyone else's Graphtreons all the time and try and.
If I feel like most people are scared of their Google searches getting out there for some, devious porn or something like that. It's for me, it's just like if you knew how much I was searching Giant Bomb subreddit, Easy Allies, Graphtreon. I mean, that is just my entire life. It's just, okay, what are people saying about Kind of Funny's Patreon updates like that? It's maybe sick, but it's fascinating. Like whenever an outlet comes out with that post, like Kit and Chris are just having recently of like, here's how we're changing our Patreon post. Here's how we're changing the content. That is catnip. Above like any other content on the internet, I am just obsessed with that. It's so fascinating just to peer over the fence and be like, what are you guys doing? How is it working for you? What seems like, ooh, that's a good idea versus like, you're promising too much. That's going to backfire. Don't do that. It's just so fun to try and figure out.
It's weird. It's like having a brick and mortar shop and having access to everyone else's like P&L or something.
Right.
You can see like when you Second Wind, for instance, right? They launched recently and you're like, holy shit. And they have the sort of like, there's this thing that happens sometimes where you get the over subscription where people sort of like, people maybe who aren't going to be in for the long haul necessarily, maybe they're not Patreon people who want to do that stuff. They come in really, so you end up having this like this incredibly like sort of beyond what you were expecting success.
The Gershman effect.
And yes, exactly. Yeah, happened with Jeff, happened with Vinny and the guys, like where you have this big launch and then it starts going down, and the perception is because people, Patreon people also look at Graphtreon. You know what I mean? Like you said, on the Giant Bomb subreddit or whatever subreddit, they're all sharing that stuff too. Not all of them, but enough of them are.
Yeah.
And and this perception then comes in. They're like, oh, the content's not good enough, and then it has this like sort of, or I mean, it can also be true. I'm not saying it's not true for any Patreons out there, but yeah, it's its own sort of phenomenon. I feel like you get as well. Whereas like, you know, some people keep that consistently as well, which is, I think, a good place to be in.
Yeah, and it's got to be really tough. I mean, it's the challenge of community funded outlets like this is, what do you base the budget off of? And I think Second Wind is doing a lot of great work. I assume you watched their Animal Well documentary recently.
I did, yeah. I really enjoyed it. Really well shot, actually. I like the camera work on it was really sweet.
Yeah,
it's different to our style, but I really like it.
Yeah, I'm glad there's more folks getting that game out there. And so maybe you hate it secretly. You're allowed to keep that private if you want. You want to be the only documentary crew in town. I get how it goes. But
I feel. Can I answer that honestly?
Sure.
I thought more people would do this after we started. And at the start, I was maybe a bit... And I mean, that there's a history there as well, right? Because Nick Calandra ran Gamumentary prior to The Escapist. And they were doing stuff sort of more in the Noclip style, I feel like, back then. And we always promoted their stuff, and I was really glad that people were doing it. I was actually more glad that independent people like them were doing it, rather than, in a way, when GameSpot started doing it again, I felt a little bit about that, because I was like, well, that was my
emotional.
gig then.
I get it.
But then the people who were doing it were my mates, so I was like, I didn't, you know, and I didn't invent talking to developers. You know what I mean? I didn't even invent video game documentaries. Like, I didn't even, like, the concept of doing all this existed long before. Like, the reason I wanted to do it is because I'd watched Building the Bastion or the old stuff on GameSpot back in the day, or Indie Game the movie. So who the fuck am I to be saying, like, I control this turf? But it does, like, I prefer having competition because it makes you, like, get better and reevaluate what you're doing. So when I saw the Second Wind we're doing one, it was like, first of all, I'm happy that it's not something we're already covering.
Yep.
And I like that about even the Gamumentary stuff. They did Kingdom Come. They did a bunch of stuff that was really cool. But the ROI on this stuff is dog shit.
Right.
So like, whenever I see people doing it, I'm like, I hope you have money to burn, because this is everyone has tried this type. Like, you can make stuff that's retrospective, or you can interview developers and you can make stuff that's worthwhile. But like, for the style of thing that we do, like we're almost finished a 3-year production on Dwarf Fortress. Like, what the fuck? Like
it's gonna be cool as hell, though, man. But it's like, I don't know if you've noticed, there's a weird rebounding you can do, and it's hopefully not to the degree of begging in a way that feels gross. But I've noticed there's an interesting effect of, if you do some, in theory, great work, or work that you're proud of, and it doesn't do that well on views wise or something, there's almost a rebound of people being like, well, now I really need to support this, because if YouTube can't support the people for this, then I need to actually check it out. Like, you know, we had an interview a while ago with the co-founder of Ready at Dawn.
Yes.
And it was his real chance, you know, for the first time, getting to open up about the Meta acquisition, everything that went wrong there, the full history of Ready at Dawn, all that stuff. Andrea Pacino over there. And
yes, great interview. He's an interesting dude as well. I remember he was most known at E3 as being the buffest motherfucker you've ever seen.
Yes,
he's like,
it's my favorite type of guy, I guess. The guy that could snap you like a twig, but you can tell that he's never considered that once in his life. You know, he's just a complete teddy bear, from what I can tell from the outside, at least. You know,
also cares about game documentaries. He worked on the Journey soundtrack behind the scene. Remember they put out that vinyl a couple of years ago, and they did a mini doc on that. They actually talked to us about putting it on Noclip, but I was like, we don't do third party ones, and I helped connect them with IGN, and that's where it eventually went up.
Yeah. So we did that.
Sorry,
it's all good. But we did that interview, and then I think I posted about it maybe on Blue Sky, or talked about it on the podcast, of just like, I think it's, again, hopefully it doesn't feel gross, but I think it's just worth informing the audience of like, hey, we did this interview. It was picked up by dozens and dozens of other news sites. And based on the back end on YouTube, at this point, the interview has made us $23 total. Right. You know, in that first week. And so many people, I mean, I say so many, probably 15 people supported us on Patreon, and then said for the reason why is they're like, well, I just felt bad that interview was really good and no one checked it out. And I realized that my support of $5 a month is, you know, a quarter of what you're making from YouTube from this. Yeah. I think a lot of people assume that YouTube and ads are supporting kind of independent creators a lot more than they really are. Whereas, yeah, I always say it, but, you know, jumping in even at that $2 tier for us on Patreon just for 1 month is literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times more helpful than just watching our stuff on YouTube. Like, it's really, it's slivers of a penny versus $2 doesn't seem like much, but it's a huge boost for us.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And we talked a bunch about you do some great like work to make people feel involved. I mean, your Discord is terrific. I know you do a lot of like reaching out to people and asking like why they got involved and stuff like that. And I've started adopting that since we spoke last, and it's been like genuinely eye opening. I think like the answers people give are like. So, oh, really? Like, I listen to the podcast all the time. I don't even watch the documentaries, or like you covered this thing years ago and I really appreciated it. And I now have the means to do it.
Yep.
Like, and you're like, wow, because of a doc we released 4 years ago, you're like, that's crazy. I'm always thinking about, because our ship turns so slowly that I'm always thinking about like, we put out the work that we want to work on, but I'm always interested in like, is this thing going to bring in more patrons? Like, I don't know. Like, is a 4-part series on Dwarf Fortress going to bring in people? Maybe the 4-part on Disco Elysium might, but like, I don't know if it'll happen that way. But yeah, I've been fascinated by the reasons that people give. It really helps pull you out of your own head, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So yeah, every new supporter we have on Patreon since I think maybe like 3 months after we started or so in 2019 is when I started doing this, but just message every new supporters to be like, hey, how'd you find us? Why'd you choose to support us? Why'd you choose the tier that you chose? And like that just constant survey running in my head. First of all, it's very flattering and kind of gross to start every morning reading those messages, because so many of them are like, oh man, you made this joke on the Game Informer Show podcast back in 2016 and I was always a big fan of you, or you made a reference to loving the band AFI and I love them too, and you made that reference back in 2017. It's like, so it's just like this beautiful...
They're like, oh, I used to watch your AFI review show on the MinnMax channel before you guys rebranded it.
Well, that was seeding the ground to like try and claim that. It's a long story, but check out A Fire Inside Out, the greatest AFI podcast out there. But
and the Twilight Highlight Zone as well.
Wow, you're really going and sorting by oldest on MinnMax's channel, I can see.
Thank you. Good job.
But it's been...
I'm no Sean Evans here,
But it's fascinating to see that. But then also, I think the big takeaway from messaging all these people for why'd you choose to support us is, 85% are just people saying like, hey, I like the vibes. You all seem to be positive in a pretty negative internet space. You all seem to like games. You seem to like each other, and I want to support that. And I think that is an interesting message for a lot of other patrons out there who are trying to recruit more people into the Patreon by making more treadmills, by making more shows, and doing all this stuff where it's like, if you are on the conservative end of content, focusing on sustainability, and you just make sure that that goodwill is maintained, and I'm very thankful that so far we've been, we've kept a positive community. But if you just keep that community feeling good in selective kind of sniper shot ways, that feels to be a more sustainable way and a better way to recruit people in, rather than, I was thinking about it recently. Maybe don't read too much into this. Let's say it was an example pulled out of thin air, but I was thinking about Assassin's Creed Shadows and thinking about, God, that's probably going to be a huge game. And that they're trying to get the pre-order bonus with like, hey, we're going to give you this exclusive quest if you pre-order the game. It's like, the last thing people want from a huge Assassin's Creed RPG is like one more quest. Like, if I could have one more quest in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And I think some outlets are kind of like that, of like, they're creating so much content out there in the games coverage space. And then it's like, hey, if you join our Patreon, we'll give you 5 extra minutes a month of us talking. And it's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Everybody in the world has too much content at this point. So if you try and just be more selective, take bigger swings, I think that's a much more convincing sell than a lot of patrons out there realize.
Yeah, I maybe we'll talk about it when we talk about the future of games coverage, but I'm with you in that same way. Is like sticking out from the noise seems more and more like, you look at people like, H-Bomber Guy or whatever, who releases basically at this stage just like a video a year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like is some of my favorite video essayists. That's how long it takes to do those investigations, but also it's like, it's a moment then, My problem is that when this is done, whether or not the internet explodes or I die or whatever it is, but whenever this is done, I want to have done as much as I could.
Right.
Like, and that's more of an artistic sort of desire than anything else. And I think it gets me in trouble sometimes. Like, we had so much fun. If we could afford to and had the time continuous to do more Noclip crew stuff, I'd love to. Like, I miss working at GameSpot and Giant Bomb and doing that stuff. Like, I watch what you guys do, and I definitely have that envy. But then I look at my premiere, and I'm like, well, I have, 18 hours of documentary and 4 months to do it. I better hurry up.
Yep.
Like I've so much work to do on this side, and it's hard to manage all that stuff at the same time. But yeah, it's a fear to, like, you're right. Like you gotta temper the faucet a bit so that people are excited for what's coming out. But I love making shit, man. I just can't stop making shit.
Yeah, and it's not to put down, the average, podcast and stuff like that. But when you look back on your career, do you think you're going to think of, those kind of smaller podcast discussions and kind of the grand sphere of your work, or are we just going to remember like the biggest swings, the biggest documentaries, or do you see it all as kind of the same?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very grateful that like Jeremy, Jesse, and Frank come on the pod and talk every week. Like that's,
by the way, not to mention the podcast. I love the podcast. Not saying it's trash. It's just a feeling of like, what is an accomplishment when you look back on your career? How many little things, how many Marvel spoiler casts do you wish you would have done? Is the shorthand of saying it, I guess.
That's a fair point, I guess. Yeah, I'll be happy. On my deathbed, I'll think about that Outer Wilds documentary and say, that was a good one. That was a good one. And the Half-Life ones will get me through a lot, but they're not officially Noclip work, so I can't necessarily say that.
Right. It is interesting though to think of and this is kind of the whole kit and caboodle of trying to figure out what is going to compel people to support on Patreon, and I think it's really hard. We have some amazing people in the MinnMax crew, and I still think it's really hard to like choose to support a Patreon because of a Let's Play. Like how funny or how interesting would that video have to be for someone to go out of their way? And then again, it's just kind of my very narrow vision for all this. And by the way, for all this stuff, don't think I have huge answers. Everyone kind of gets so lasered in on their own world that they're missing a larger perspective. And there's the RKG folks. There are folks out there who do just Let's Plays, and they have a huge amount of support for it. So I should probably stop talking. But I found just from our messages that, it is typically the bigger swings that'll get people to jump in. And so if you're creating stuff that people are normally getting on YouTube for free anyway, the idea of connecting that with supporting on Patreon, I don't think is there. You need to do something that is a little bit different, that stands out a little bit and makes somebody turn their head, not a full 180 degrees, but just a 6-degree head turn is the best you can do, I think, on YouTube to make somebody go like, wait, what is this? Who are these people? That seems cool. I'm going to support an outlet that's doing weird stuff like this.
Yeah, I think that's, in a way, like I kind of like the current world of coverage because it's, like you said, you have to stick your head out of the pulpit a bit to get noticed. Like Noclip was a version of that where it was like, oh, we're going to focus on this very particular thing,
totally,
and see how long it takes us. But what is your version of that? Jumping out of planes, doing ice plunges, and to say nothing of stuff like Pew Pew Bang. Unfortunately, is a novel thing. Like it's sad that it is in a way, but like,
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, so Pew Pew Bang is a podcast so it's Kelsey Loon and Sarah Pozorski and Haley McLean and Jenna Garcia started, who are kind of the women of MinnMax, I suppose. And it was a couple months ago. It was an interesting message where Kelsey just reached out of the blue, maybe after a certain election, who can say? And she's like, I just feel like I need to do something, and I want to find more of our people. I'm looking for we want to find just quote unquote gamer girls that don't fall into that, gross marketing bucket of gamer girls, I suppose.
The frag dolls of who I think never existed. Like the frag dolls were for men, I guess. I should or boys maybe is a better way of putting it.
So they're like, hey, we want to start this podcast, and that's like the dream of having an outlet like MinnMax is like, hey, you all do your own thing, come up with an idea, let me know what it is by the end. And by the time they were pitching it,
amen.
By the time they were pitching it to me, they're like, yep, we have the name, we have the show. It's going to be like a video game slumber party. Episodes come out every other week. We got the logo all arranged. I was like, this is amazing. And it's refreshing just to be able to stand back and be like, whatever you guys want to do, by all means, run with it. And yeah, the Pew Pew Bang podcast, which is a standalone podcast. It's not a Patreon exclusive or anything, but it's kicking butt. Like it was hitting #1 on the podcast charts and stuff. Yeah. It's super exciting to see that team kind of feel like, God, we want to create something new, and then to have it take off like that. It's been great.
We talked a lot about a Patreon. Can we do a shout out to our patrons?
I'm not that interested, Danny. We gotta keep talking about ourselves, please.
Yeah, but there might be some funny names.
Of course, no, I love it. These people are the reason this exists.
Maybe you'll mispronounce some. Ben has very kindly, before we went on air, said that he would read out our patrons. Patreon.com/Noclip, our incredible Battle Pass holders. They pay the wonderful price of $69.99 for this honor. Ben Hanson, take it away.
Yeah, these are all new supporters. Or what's the arena here?
These are all our top tier supporters. These are the whales of the Noclip community, if you will.
Okay, get your whale calls ready, everybody, because we're calling out to Anthony Thomas, Nico Passateri, Itsami Ferraro, Penelope Hayes. Oh, is that bad? Ferraro.
It's a me, Ferrario.
I'm going to blow it. Penelope Hayes, Senator Armstrong from Metal Gear Rising. Oh, I'm honored.
Is that who that was? I thought that's
I think that's a
I've never
reference.
put two and two together. In my head, that's who that person is, but I've never actually confirmed it.
I hope it is him on the other side of the keyboard. Iman Slattery, Harry Flanagan, Juice, Arno, Richard Matherson. Almost the name of a Twilight Zone writer. I'll be damned. Matt Pearson, James Brown. Look at the celebrity cast. You have Mark Rojas, Tucker Morgan, David McGarry, Sven Huster. Apologies. Pez, Nate, Tim Robinson, Forrest Pruitt, Jonathan Kreeman, Eric Hamilton Schneider, Christoph Fetui.
Let me hold you for a second.
Please.
The next one you really have to give some gusto to.
Cameron Ladd or the one before that?
No, that one, yeah.
Why? What's so special about Cameron?
It's just the thing. They're just, yeah.
Cameron Ladd, hero
Nice, thank you.
among people. Zachary Snader, Alex Goucher, George Tiziorikotis, Jacob Godserve, Anthanagian, Tother Tilyev, and Reeson Riken. God, I was feeling confident out of the gate, and it fell apart by the end. This is like ranked by difficulty or something, I feel like.
I wonder if ours has a more European slant, perhaps.
That could be.
We might be getting, there's a couple more Greeks than you usually get, maybe, and Cypriots.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thrown in there. No, thank you, dude. Absolutely. Round of applause. Great work.
Oh, please.
Great
Round of
work,
applause for these folks. That's very sweet. They support you in a big way.
Absolutely love it. How have you been doing with, you seem like somebody who, works a lot, puts in a decent amount of effort. You welcomed a beautiful baby into the world last year. How are you doing? How have you balanced your responsibilities at home and at home?
It's been a challenge. It's amazing. I don't want to turn into the standard old parenting podcast, but not to take anything away from that incredible experience of just, I was thinking about it the other day. It's like, I think having a kid is just getting 2 emotional gut punches at least every day. Just a punch gut of love. It hits you so hard. And so that's been amazing. It's definitely freaked me out on the work front. And I'm sure you've had many of these same emotions of just, it feels like, all right, I'm used to running 2 miles a day or whatever the hell it is. It's like, what? Why am I not even getting to a mile and I'm out of energy? And it's not a matter of energy for me, but it's just a matter of time. And it's just that confusing feeling of like, why do I feel like I'm getting just a sliver of stuff done? I crunch the numbers. I should be able to do this. And so that freaks me out. And it is a weird source of pride. And I don't mean to send this out into the world and get it started, but it's a weird source of pride that I haven't seen too many pissy Reddit threads about, like, ever since Ben had his baby, MinnMax has really gone downhill. Like, it seems like people are still just getting happier and happier with us as an outlet. And so it's like, oh, thank God that there's not, in my mind, it's very clear to have this dividing line of like before kid, after kid. And I'm glad that the community hasn't been able to feel that. I feel like hopefully that's a sign of success. And as long as my wife is happy, then everything is okay.
Yeah, I think the hardest time that I had was probably just from a workload perspective or time management or whatever, was from when my daughter was born until maybe she was 2 or something like that, because like it's hard to like, you don't want to be the deadbeat dad, right? You don't want to be like, I'm not around, I'm not co-parenting well enough, I'm not, I'm not there for the quiet moments, not just the loud moments where I need to be there. Like, it was really important for me to be like available and around and stuff like that. But then also for the longest time, I liked having a place to work where I could focus. Like, I would, once COVID chilled out again, I got a studio, before COVID went wrong, I got a studio. Once COVID chilled out, I got just so I could go and be there and then leave and come home and not work weekends, not work evenings, as much as is possible, even though 25% of my brain is probably similar to yours, constantly thinking about what to do next or what we're doing. But I had a similar thing where the only thing that made me feel better was going through that 2 years of it and then looking back and going, oh, everything was fine. I didn't maybe need to be killing myself as hard as I was before or something
on the work front.
On the work front, yeah.
Is there a sick part of you, though, that kind of gets a thrill out of the eras in your life where you were sprinting like a madman? And I know it teeters maybe on unhealthy crunch culture, and I'm doing great. At the same time, I do look back, thankfully, as MinnMax has continued to grow, I've been able to kind of offload some duties of like, okay, Haley McLean, you host our Patreon exclusive podcast every Monday now. Leo Vader, now you can edit our new Show Plus series and stuff like that. And then every once in a while I look back just on a couple of years ago and it's like, God, I was doing all of this and also running a Deepest Dive and hosting Trivia Tower and all these things before I had started to really delegate. And there's a part of me that's weirdly into that idea of like, it is fun when you have those pockets, those days where you look back on it and be like, holy cow, I've gotten a lot done. There's something romantic about it in a gross way.
100%. No, like when I think about like, I'm with you. I think like crunch culture as it is, if it's something that is dictated from the top down, that's not good. But if you are in the zone and dedicating yourself to like when I broke into GameSpot in the UK, that's all I was for like 2 years. Right. Like I just worked and went home and they used to kick me out. Chris Beaumont, my boss in the UK when he was leaving, he was like, we're going. Because he knew that I would stay there all night. So he was like, no, you got to go. You're not allowed to be here after 5 o'clock.
And you hated that message?
I respected him for doing it to me. And I appreciate, even at the time, I kind of went, no, you're right. But I would go home, have dinner and then work at home. Yeah. Because I was, it was like, oh, I finally broke into the industry. Well, now I have to, prove the point. I have to like make sure that nobody thought this was a mistake,
I get it.
Send this guy back to Ireland.
For sure. Yeah.
I think I'm lucky enough that I still get those crunch. Lucky enough. I'm with you though. I'm with you. Like I worked in theater for years. Like that's what that is. Right. Is like building. And then, from tech week to the run of the show, it is 100% of your life. And it's fun. And it's especially fun when you're doing it with other people. I think when we film our docs, like, that is very much that. It's like get on an airplane, all this equipment, work all day, get enough sleep at night, wake up the next day, get interview prep, go do it again. It's usually long, like I had a trip last year where we had a mixture of Noclip and secret tape stuff. And I was away for a month. So it was like Korea, Warsaw, Sweden, and then I went to Ireland. My family came to Sweden, so at least I was only technically gone for 2 weeks and then we did that. So those are the moments that I still get at it. Or like doing the Half-Life stuff. Like that was similarly, like that was super crunchy. Like that edit was actually not fun at the end, by the end of it.
Yeah.
I was just terrified. But so I'm with you though. I think that's the stuff I miss the most from GameSpot is that I'm doing it with other people. Yep, like when everyone's doing it, it's amazing,
Everybody has such fun memories of E3, but at Game Informer, E3 was, it was a stressful time. But I think where I think it gets unhealthy in my past is kind of that kind of chip on the shoulder mentality or a little bit of the martyr complex, I suppose. But when you're working really hard at Game Informer, it'd be a matter of like, well, I'm going to edit all these cover story videos and I'm going to have to stay late to get them done. And I'm going to do the podcast and stay late to edit that and post that. But at the same time, I don't want the podcast taken away from me. So I need to pretend like it's not a big deal. But then you get this chip on your shoulder and then it becomes a matter of like, they don't know how hard I'm working. And I'm going to get more and more of a grudge because of the energy that I'm using to do the extra work, to just get more and more angry about why am I not getting further ahead in this company? And that's where it, I think, creates a really dangerous cycle.
Especially in like companies like that or similar to GameSpot where like there was nowhere to go.
Right.
Like what was your next job really meant to be? Like there's small organizations. Even when you go up, the pay is usually not all that much better. Like by the time I was leaving GameSpot, I was like, either you put me in charge of all video for GameSpot or I'm going, because I was just like, there's no way I'm getting ahead. Like I'm not in the management ecosystem here. For some reason, you've decided that I'm not a manager. Probably because I shit talk all the existing managers all the time, and I'm not a team player. But yeah, they decided that, and yeah, similarly by the end, I left before that I was worried about that sort of increasing. That I wanted to leave happy with what I had done there and missing it and sad to go, rather than feeling like I needed to sort of jump, I guess. I kind of stepped away, and that made me feel better about it. Because GameSpot was like it's probably same to you with Game Informer. Like GameSpot was my first love on the internet. Like I loved that place. I still love that place. I loved all the people who work there. I still love all of them, and I didn't want to have any negative association with it whatsoever. So yeah, that was important. I think it was like an ex-girlfriend you spent a long time with. I don't want to burn those years.
Right. It is such a weird, emotional, complicated thing. But I look back on Game Informer so fondly, and it's like, God, that was the best job conceivable. I think the MinnMax one is probably better, but still like the Game Informer era is like, okay, every month I would get to fly around the world to visit the studio, for the game we were highlighting, for the game that was on the cover.
How many trips? You must have done like 100 trips.
It was 80 cover story trips.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was so fun. And so it's so fun just to look back at the history of Game Informer and every issue of the magazine. It's like, I remember who went on that trip. I remember where we went. And you think of the location so much more. I remember the restaurants we went to, it's just fun to see, the Game Informer span in that run, and from that lens. And at the same time, after I left Game Informer, especially after the layoffs and everything just kind of imploded emotionally, I think about like, God, it was such an incredible job, but I was so pissy about so many things. I had so many notes in my phone of like, next employee review, I'm going to bring up these points and I'm going to make this case about myself because blah, 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 blah. And then this isn't fair because this person got this and I got this. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, man. You start to realize in retrospect, like, God, maybe I was really angry a lot of the time there. And it's just a weird combination of having those emotions along with like, God, best years of my life. That was so incredible.
What do you think? What's different? Is it I remember, not to load the question up as I shoot it your way, but it's exactly what I'm going to do. Greg Miller told me when I was meeting with him before I started Noclip, he said, every decision is yours and everything you put in, you get back. And like he said, that's the difference, is that you probably don't know what that feels like right now, but good and bad, whatever you put into this thing, you're going to get back. For me, it was control, for sure. Having control and autonomy. I don't mind if things go wrong, if they're on my shoulders, but being stuck with a fucking captain who's driving the thing into the rocks was the thing I used to, and I'm screaming at them and there's nothing that they'll listen to. But then there's also the youth element. When you're that young and you're that hungry, a lot of the time it manifests as anger. So what do you think sort of changed for you?
No, I think it was control. And I think about it a lot in terms of like, I was just, something that I'm so thankful for with MinnMax is being able to wrap my head in theory around everything we're doing, and being able to message it. That was the part that just killed me, is like, can we just have consistent messaging? What is our strategy? What are we doing? How are we pushing this thing? Hopefully not in a gross marketing 101 kind of way, but just if you're on the community side of things, I want to be able to explain, these are our priorities. These are our pillars. These are our main shows. This show is popping up as a bonus because of this. And then this is a bi-weekly schedule. Just like that level of communication, I was beating my head against the wall, I feel like, for 9 years of Game Informer about just, what are we doing? We can't just keep running around like rabbits and expect a community to build up coherently on the other side. And so I am so thankful every time that, I might get frustrated about some things at MinnMax, just small things here and there. I just think about like, God, I'm so, so lucky that I'm able to kind of digest this entire outlet and just communicate it hopefully well to the community of like, this is what we're doing. Here's why we're pivoting here. Here's the plan with this show. Here's the plan with this show. Like that level of just kind of curated messaging is a godsend.
I think you guys are like one of the best in the industry at doing that. And I think it's something that our community has criticized me on, which I think is very fair. Because I feel like whenever we do anything, I want to break the mold immediately, where it's like, oh, we're doing, back in the day, we started doing 3-part series, and then I was like, oh, let's just do like really big ones. And then, okay, we did some really big docs. I'm like, let's do like an embedded thing. Let's do that and then do this. And then, so we're fucking all over the place. And then we do things like, I spun out a podcast on a separate feed, and then I integrated it back into this feed, or we did Noclip Crew, and then we didn't do that. And I think it's perceived a lot by people, rightfully, I'm not critiquing them, as like us failing a lot, maybe like doing something and then not sticking with it. Whereas to me as an artist, it's like, no, like this is, I gotta break shit. Like I need failure to learn. So to me, it's not failure. It's like, oh, we tried that thing and I learned. I'm taking 15% of that with me on my creative journey to the next thing.
Right.
But I need to do, like, that's my process.
That's interesting. I mean, how do you communicate that? Are you able to say in your Patreon post and updates? I mean, just saying like, I know this doesn't make sense. I just need to do it. Like, it's just a tough message to convey.
It is. I think people who listen to the Patron show, which is sort of like 40 minutes to an hour of me explaining everything we're doing every month sort of reiterating this stuff. Like, I think to them it probably comes across, but I don't know what our YouTube people think, because like that's our biggest community, and we'll just like not post anything for 4 months, and then here's a fucking big documentary on cyberpunk or something. You know what I mean? Like, so one of the things that we're doing for the Dwarf Fortress doc, for instance, is putting up a video ahead of time on YouTube, being like, not just what's coming, but like why we're doing it. Yeah. Because that's the other thing, is I think a lot of people think that we're either in bed with the developer or publisher, or we're getting funded to do this stuff by them, or I've probably muddied the waters with that a little bit by doing this Valve stuff. And, we tried to keep that stuff as church and state as humanly possible. And I've no regrets on that, because it's been some of the most fun work, and also has, helped a great deal with keeping the crew, keeping money coming in. Yeah. But yeah, it is. But it is tricky. How do you balance that? Like when you sunset a show, how do you do that? Do you do it quietly or do you do it loudly?
It's a good question. Yeah, we have a system. There's a system in place that I'm again endlessly thankful for. And I think it was Ana Diaz, who's with us at the time, who's now at Polygon, and Leo, who came up with, I think, the core of the idea for the system that we have called New Show Plus, where every week we pitch 4 new shows to the community, and then the Patreon supporters get to vote on which new show we create or continue. And so, are you an Incredibles fan by chance? Can I make a strange analogy?
The Pixar cartoon?
That's not a good sign. Yeah.
I've seen it. Okay. I've seen them.
Okay.
There's more than one, right?
Yes. There's this incredible sequence where he's learning about the full history of Syndrone's lab and all the robots they're building. And it's like, they're showing like, okay, this robot defeated this robot. Then this robot continues and this robot defeats this robot. I always think of that for New Show Plus in terms of, if we have a really good show, we'll keep building. Eventually, because we're pitching new shows every week, we'll have a show that can defeat it, right? So it's like, okay, then a new show's going. And in theory, that show's better than the old one. And so the beauty of that system, and I really am happy with it so far, is it lets us constantly seem creative and to try weird experimental new stuff. But at the same time, it's like, well, the community gets to vote on all this stuff. And so if you loved a show and it only went for 2 episodes before some other show replaced it, can't be mad at us. The community voted for it. And so naturally things will die out, instead of having that thing that every other outlet has. And, we also have it for other shows of just like, this show's getting a little long in the tooth, but there's definitely the subset of fans that love it. So if we end it, we're going to piss people off. But just having a system in place where we always get to experiment and there's logic to why things are fading out, I think hopefully it helps. But at the same time, there's shows where it's like, God, we used to be better about every year kind of having the full refresh. And I always try to pull from the old Sid Meier quote of like, for every new Civ game, it's like, okay, we're going to keep a third of it, we're going to change a third of it, and then a third of it's going to be new. And so for the first couple of years at MinnMax, that was the philosophy for our content. And then around like, year 3.5 or so, it started to be like, I like our content. Like everything's being pretty efficient. I don't know if I want to change it that much, but so hopefully everything's communicated well. I fell for a trap recently, which is a good trap to fall in, I suppose. But, the Criterion Closet Picks, that series on YouTube, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so who doesn't like watching those just easy 6-minute videos to watch, yada, 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 for actors and directors picking out some favorite movies that meant a lot to them. And so I was always kicking myself watching that, being like, God, we should have done that at Game Informer. Because we had the quote unquote vault of games of like every game Game Informer was ever shipped. And every time we had a developer buy the office, they'd come in and it would just be like the most fun 30 minutes of them going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe you have this Genesis game. This is the first game I ever worked on, man. You got to check out the second level. And so I was just kicking myself about like, why didn't we do that at Game Informer when we had the chance? And then I remembered that Kelsey Lewin on our team, she owns now 4 used video game stores. And it's,
Shout out Pink Gorilla.
of course, in Seattle, yeah. And so we're like, oh, we should try to do that and just see how it goes. And so we got Ryan Payton, who worked on Metal Gear Solid 4 and Subsistence for Metal Gear Solid 3, and then eventually Halo 4 before he was fired from the project, yada, yada, yada. And then started Republic, and they just released Batman Arkham Shadow. I started Camouflage, worked on Republic and Batman Arkham Shadow. But anyways.
Arkham Shadow is the VR game, right?
Yeah. Did you play it?
Yes. It's really good.
It's good.
Yeah, MetaQuest 3. It's really good. Yeah.
And so, so we did a video which was Ryan Payton coming to Pink Gorilla and then just walking around the store, sharing some memories from games that he worked on, but then also just games that he had a sweet nostalgic thing to say about. Like he was a big fan of Shenmue, so we talked about that for a long time, or Rad Racer on NES. And that was one of those that I felt really bad. And I talked to Kelsey a lot about it, of just like, I don't know how to message it, because I'm really proud of us being really clear with the community. And this is one of those things that's just, I don't think bandwidth-wise we can commit to doing this on a regular basis. It's not a matter of you're going to have a 5-episode limited series or something. And so we're just going to do 1 episode. And if it really blows up, we'll probably want to do more. But if it doesn't, And so it's in that realm of like, I feel bad for just sending out a trial balloon and then being like, all right, it's a trial balloon because I just wanted to send out a trial balloon for the sake of it because it's kind of fun to do,
Totally. And I think it's like you're probably on the way you do it and the responsible way in which you approach that stuff is probably closer to how the audience feels, because the audience doesn't want to feel like you are floundering or making weird decisions because their trust in you goes.
Sure.
But whereas I don't know why, but my creative instinct has always been, I don't care. Like I don't care if people think, like, I don't care if I make a bunch of weird bad shit that people don't like, because they'll like something, I guess. And
right.
And I think it's more that like my anxiety and because a lot of like, at least my desire to do stuff is fear of becoming obsolete or fear of this work not resonating with people. So I'm always trying to sort of lay the tracks as quickly as ahead as possible and find that new ground as quickly as possible. So to me, it's scarier to not evolve, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Right. I mean, if it was just the Noclip documentaries, do you think you would have burned out at this point?
I think if it was just the docs, which it kind of is again, just the docs, but I think if we did them the same format all the time, then yeah.
Right.
And in a way I can see that being something that might be more snackable for our audience, that might be more easy to watch a lot of them. Like if you watch an episode of Hot Wings, they've not changed, or Hot Ones, sorry, they've not changed the format, right? Or those, like you said, everyone like GQ and Vogue and everyone does these like formatted shows, right? And I get it. And I feel the same way when a new series of Drive to Survive, the Netflix series, comes on about Formula One. I know the format. I know what it's going to be. But the episodes that I like are always the ones that break the format. And so I like to challenge people as much as possible. And I think when you challenge them and it works, you hit their hearts more than if you might like... They might appreciate the stable diet of this format of documentary every single time, but I think eventually you're not doing anything that's like worthwhile, or its artistic merit maybe doesn't hit home as hard or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, so then it comes down to people who there's probably a ton of people who are just fans of the podcast for you guys, right?
I suspect so. I mean, our biggest community is definitely YouTube, and it's the one whenever we put something up that the most fervor happens around.
Okay.
And then the podcast is obviously like very different. It's kind of a way. The other problem with the podcast is that it's kind of antithetical to a lot of the Noclip stuff, where it's current games. It's a lot of, I mean, the games we play as people, the 4 of us, are very indie and weird. And we do cover some of that stuff on the docs. Like we mostly cover indie studios, but they tend not to be maybe the most esoteric ones. Like we're not going to make a 4-part series on fucking Despolate or something, or maybe we should. I don't know. Why is it a golden idol? We'll just jump in. But yeah, I think there's a balancing act there. Like Dwarf Fortress is a good candidate because it's like that's the ultimate game no one plays but wants to read about. It's like Eve, or people watching videos of Tarkov on YouTube who never play the game because it scares the fuck out of them, aka me. It's an interesting balancing act.
I think
that whole thing.
By the way, I mean I think the podcast does such a good job. I mean, somebody's asked me recently, like, how do you find out about like obscure good new game releases? And it's like, we try to cover as much as we can at MinnMax, but at the same time, when I think of like the podcasts who are usually on the cutting edge of like, here's a cool game that's under the radar, I think your podcast is definitely up there.
You too. That's all Jesse Garash's work and Jeremy as well. And then me and Frank have our weird little corners that we are into as well. Tends to be a little bit less indie. How do you approach, I guess, the sort of, let's talk about the Patreon numbers.
Sure.
Amazing, right? Your YouTube stuff.
Yeah.
So your patron to YouTube number is insane. Right. So, but obviously the flip side to that is, do you ever worry about growth on YouTube? Because you guys have a healthy community, like a really dedicated community, and your videos do well on YouTube, but you're not like, fucking 1 million subscribers or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you're not up there. How do you feel about YouTube as its own sort of metric, I guess, for success?
Yeah.
Or onboarding people? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting puzzle. It is funny. It's like, it's kind of a weird, double-edged sword, or I don't know how you want to say it, backhanded compliment when you get that of like, God, your Patreon numbers are great. The ratio to YouTube is really impressive. We're just going for like, are we failing on YouTube in a big way?
It's like saying your wife is really beautiful. Like, how did you manage that?
Exactly. What is happening here? It's funny. So I think we're at like 61,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we've been growing decently over the last year. Like our watch time in 2024 was up 67%. Compared to the year before.
Wow, year on year.
Yeah.
Wow.
And a lot of that, to be fair, was because we did a big oral history of PopCap. But we did that.
Yes, I saw that video did really well. Actually.
Oh, yeah, it's funny. We did that back in 2021. And for some reason, YouTube decided to wait until now to throw it in everybody's feeds. So that was probably a big factor for the watch time.
We had our one for that was Jeremy did a Noclip crew about Heroes of Might and Magic 3.
Of
so
course.
Like pretty fucking obscure. And then like I went on the fucking I wonder if I can find it now. I went on the analytics one day and I was like, what the fuck happened here? Because it did like 15,000 views maybe, and then now it's up to 170,000, and it happened in like a month. We were like, what happened in like Hungary? One of these places where they're huge Might and Magic fans. Something must have happened, or it was just YouTube decided it.
It is confusing. Now all we get on that PopCap video, because it's 4 hours long, and so every comment now is just like, dude, I just woke up from a nap and this was playing. I don't know what this is. So I think there's something with YouTube where it's just pushing it to everybody, whether they want it to or not.
The algorithm, just like you're bot farming people or view botting people. That's amazing.
Not on our end. But anyways, so yeah, YouTube, we're still, I'm happy with the YouTube numbers. I remember talking to Brian David Gilbert in an interview we did. I think it's like our #1 video on our channel is still that interview with Brian David Gilbert. And he was talking about like...
He's got that effect.
He really does, yeah. But it's like, I was asking him just about, does he feel successful? The fact that he can just, would put out a video at Polygon that was just called Wario. And it would get like 2 million views. Like, how the fuck? Surely other people have tried that. But he's like, I don't know, the success, you don't really feel it. You just feel that more people are angry at you. And the YouTube comments just get shittier and shittier. And so there is a certain aspect of that where like, I love the core MinnMax community, not in a gross parasocial way, of course, but it is funny that like when videos start to do well and get outside of our bubble a little bit, the real indicator is just, these YouTube comments are getting more misogynistic. Okay, that means we're kind of leaving our nest a little bit. And not to say that we shouldn't push for that, because we do need to expand on YouTube to find new people to fuel the Patreon so we can keep rolling with it. But yeah, we've definitely struggled a little bit. We see a lot of those comments of people being like, I can't believe this doesn't have 1 million views on YouTube. And it's like, I don't know. That's very flattering. I think probably the water has found its level. I don't think there's some great injustice in the world because our podcast is not getting 100,000 views for this thing. But something that we found that's been really helpful. Found is a weird way to put it, but we back in 2014, I think it was, we started doing rapid fire interviews at Game Informer.
Yes.
Where it started with the No Man's Sky cover story we did. And it was like, God, what do we ask him about No Man's Sky? How do you wrap your head around what should be a video about this? And I remember Jeff Marchiafava at the time, who's now at MinnMax, at the time, he's like, just ask him if you could ride a fucking dinosaur. I was like, oh yeah. It's like, that should be the video, is just asking a bunch of rapid fire questions. Like, can you do this? Can you do this? And granted that, maybe didn't end up the best for No Man's Sky when that game launched, and a lot of the things they said were going to be in the game were not. But that format really worked well. And so it was really fun to keep that growing at Game Informer. And then when I left, it was like, well, I created it, but at the same time, it's a Game Informer thing. And so they kept doing it. God bless them. I helped out every once in a while of like, they were like, hey, we're doing Tim Schafer for Psychonauts 2 Rapid Fire. Do you want to contribute any questions? I'm like, oh my God, absolutely, please. And so then when Game Informer went down last year, then I was like, you know what? Let's just yoink that right back and start doing it at MinnMax here. And so we've done, I think, like 4 of them at MinnMax so far. And that has been, it was kind of, I think, the missing arrow in our quiver for content, because they generally get outside of the bubble. It's an easier, more consistent format than, just doing a preview for a new game. Hopefully it's shedding some new light in a fun way. And I think they're really weird interviews because they're so fast. They get so much content in there. But it's so amazing the number of people that, I don't know, based on the comments, they don't seem to think that it's a weird thing to do. There's like, this is how every interview should be. Like, no, this is a weird interview. Yeah. It's weird how fast and punchy this one is. But
it's like interviews for the listen to a podcast on 2x speed generation.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
I think so.
It's all killer and no filler.
Yes. And so that's been really fun. And like the Avowed rapid fire we did, we got like 1,000 new.
Patel, yeah.
She did a great job. And it was
she's terrific.
We got like over 1,000 new subs from that one. The Split Fiction one has taken off. And so it's like, okay, that it seems like to be what we needed in our arsenal, is to have this somewhat reliable way to get new subscribers and get the word about MinnMax out there a little bit. And so that's been really fun. And they're so fun to put together. It's like, it is the best case scenario where we're trying to recreate what we used to do it back at Game Informer a little bit, where it's like, it's so much more fun as like a group project. And so the way we do it now at MinnMax is like, hey, we're doing, a rapid fire about Split Fiction coming up. Whoever's in Minneapolis, let's go out and get like a big breakfast. Thank you, Patreon supporters, for paying for our pancakes. And let's just have fun, and let's just like lob jokes and sincere questions. And we all did research ahead of time about the game, and then just write down as many as we can. And then we record the interview. I boil it down, obviously, record the interview. And then we do like another round where we do like a screener, where we have people come in, just like people from MinnMax, and we all watch it together, and I can see then, and we record it. And if you're at the $10 tier, you get to watch this editing pass and screening pass, which I think is kind of dorky, fun behind the scenes stuff. So we do like a screener, and then we have a recording, and also I can just watch and be like, this joke does not work. This is confusing. And so it's a really fun.
It's like a dress rehearsal for the video.
Yeah. It's because we used to do that at Game Informer, where we'd record these rapid fires on the cover story trips, and then like go back and watch it in the office, like in the office bullpen, and you could just get such a good feel for like, this question sucks, or like, I really thought this was going to be a fun recurring gag and it is confusing. And so it is fun to have a format of an interview like that where we're really trying to hopefully tighten it down to just the good shit.
That's terrific. Yeah. It's been great seeing that. And you're right. It's sometimes that's all you need, is you need one of your things every once in a while to sort of pop up a bit and get that Reddit love or get shared on social media or whatever. Are you finding that social media, for instance, because the vectors for what is popular, like for instance, you mentioned your like podcast on YouTube is doing whatever it's doing, but like the hidden figures are the podcast metrics on Apple Podcasts or whatever, and you guys are constantly right up there in the mix as well. Do you find that that social media is a place that you are getting more or less hits when it comes to promoting your work?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it was a couple years ago, Janet Garcia, bless her heart, was really beating the drum of like, you are blowing it. Why aren't you on TikTok and Instagram? It's like, yep, I know. I just don't really like using those platforms, so I don't want to do it. And now it seems stupid that we would make all these clips and just share them on Twitter. Like, who's watching a minute-long video on Twitter? It's pretty rare, right? And so that's been fascinating to push more and more in that direction, and to have it is kind of fun then to be like, okay, this is the highlight of this episode. This is the funniest thing that happened. Let's turn that into a TikTok. And we've actually, TikTok, we're slowly growing. We've had a couple Instagram clips now, both starring Haley McLean from Bonus Pod, which is amazing. But both of them have crossed like 1 million views, which is huge for us.
Right.
And that's just, it's a fascinating thing to try and figure out though of, it's fun to see the numbers go up. I am still really skeptical about how many people, even out of those 1 million, are going, who is this? MinnMax, let me look them up on YouTube. And then they find us on YouTube. And then they also throw the next Hail Mary pass of, I like this YouTube channel so much, I'm going to support them on Patreon. Yeah. And so I don't think you can't judge it based on that. Like, we're not getting a big boost on Patreon because of the TikTok presence. But at the same time, I think every time I get self-conscious about that, I do think the value of posting those things on Instagram and TikTok is, worst case scenario, it's a nice way just to let followers of MinnMax know what else is going on. Like people who support us because, and it's probably a wild majority, support us just because of the main podcast, the MinnMax Show podcast. And then they get to see like, oh, what is this? Yeah, Leo and Ben jumped into an icy lake, and we get to see that minute-long clip, the end, just to let them know that like, hey, we're doing something with your support, even if you don't really see it, if you just listen to the podcast. And so that feels better than hoping for a wave of Patreon support because of social stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. If your acquisition funnel, right? It's all about that sort of having them make that one step. But I'm with you. Like the way in which it feels like the Instagram, especially, is where I see a lot of MinnMax's stuff pop up.
Okay, yeah.
And to me, that's what it is. It is like, oh shit, I didn't know they did that. I didn't know that video was up. I missed that thing. My YouTube subscription thing didn't pull it up or whatever. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm feeling it's diminishing returns, or the amount of effort you have to put in sometimes is tricky. But then if you're not there, if you're not at the party, you know what I mean? You can't drink a pint. I don't know what the end of that metaphor was.
That's the old axiom. I know it.
If you're not at the party.
No, but it is interesting to I am so curious to know like what Giant Bomb's numbers were back in the day for the Bombcast for audio listeners,
yeah.
Because seeing behind the scenes of our numbers, it's like there are times I'm endlessly thankful. But there is a part of me every once in a while where we're like really high up on the Apple Podcast charts, and I'm like, we don't have that big of an audience, So I mean,
yeah, you're like, is 40,000 like what is number one like 50,000 or something?
It must be. I mean, maybe Kind of Funny can answer this, but I mean, for the MinnMax Show, I think on YouTube it was averaging around like 18,000 views for last year. And then for like it's a little bit squirrely because we have the audio feed for Patreon supporters as well. So that's a couple thousand in there.
It's pulling out of it.
But for like the main podcast feed, it's like averaging about 22,000 per episode for listens. Yeah, I'm very thankful. But at the same time, it is just a weird feeling of like, in my mind, the Bombcast back in the day was like 300,000.
Yeah, in my head, it was somewhere around 250,000 to like 300,000 around there. Yeah,
and so it's not like we should have 100% audience. I'm curious to see like is it just a matter of there's so many gaming podcasts, everyone's branched out 1,000 different ways, or are people turning off from gaming podcasts in general, and I should be more scared about our future? Like it's just it's bizarre to see behind the scenes and be like, God, it's not that many. I don't think.
Yeah. I have wondered that exact same question because of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
like I have had that exact. Yeah, because sometimes we'll get up there, right? On our podcast on YouTube or on the feeds gets between 8 and 13,000, kind of depending on where we're at, and then the YouTube version gets like between 2 and 3 maybe. Some will go up a bit more, right? But like sometimes we're dancing in the top 10,
right?
And I'm like, huh? You know what I mean? Like I'm like, really? All right.
Yeah.
Cool. And I guess.
Just to fully bend over backwards and all the stuff here, like I understand we're very lucky and very entitled to be like, that number seems huge to a lot of people 100%. And I get it.
Yeah.
But even like I'm trying to think, and it was a different behind the scenes service, but like back at Game Informer for the Game Informer show, I want to say we were like maybe around 30,000 per episode. But then again, it's like, I think that number was just screwy, because if I think of like the feeling of the quote unquote cultural impact of the MinnMax show versus the Game Informer show, when I was hosting it, it's like, oh, it's night and day. It feels like MinnMax is more impactful. So I don't know what that means exactly.
They've gotten better with the feeds as well, because it used to be that if you were subscribed, you would auto download lots of stuff. Whereas now they know if you've listened to it, it doesn't get pulled up, and there's even like a threshold. Like if somebody listens for like not enough, then it doesn't even do it that way. Like the analytics on that stuff is better. It's closer to like that's an actual listen than it used to be. So maybe that's the other thing. Maybe the Bombcast back in the day, and it was, you know, it was like YouTube subs. Like we have 850,000 YouTube subs. Like I bet like fucking 400,000 of them are dead. You know what I mean? Like you never. It's not like we're putting up videos and they're all getting millions of views. You know what I mean? Like,
and so does YouTube then punish you for having so many subs, but the views aren't there? And I think about it a lot in terms of our YouTube subscriber numbers of like, this is petty, I agree, but just that feeling of like, oh, are we not getting invited to as many preview events as we could be? Because people are seeing our YouTube numbers and they're like, MinnMax isn't that big. Whereas if I make the case of like, as a gaming outlet overall, I think we're up there, and I'm really thankful for it. But it's a weird case to try and make to, I don't know, EA or, you know, different publishers out there, but like, oh, we should be included in your preview cycle because it doesn't look like it, but I think we're actually one of the biggest gaming outlets out there, even though it's technically just the weird structure of me being full-time and everybody else is a part-time contractor. But it's like, I still think we're in the arena, I think. Well, now you've done the smart thing. You point at the rapid fire questions. You show, look at the views that are on that. There you go, freebie. Takes one of your people a couple of hours to do that. There's a fun thing. Let's talk about games coverage, because I am in the same position as you in a way. Like there's it feels like I'm talking to like some sort of like conjoined twin who's off in another universe doing this same. We seem to have a lot of the same sort of fears and aspirations, and just the desire for everyone to play more Age of Empires and Age of Mythology, but no one's doing it, man. That's the problem.
Are they not?
No, I think they're out there. Actually, I'm the problem. I haven't checked out the new DLC for Age of Mythology, the extended version or retold edition, where they added the whole Chinese mythology now. A new version of the Chinese mythology than the last remaster's Chinese edition. It's a confusing thing.
You know what I want now? Did they release it? I saw there was a Rise of Nations one getting worked on.
Wait, really?
Did I make that up in my fucking head? I might have just had a dream.
Like a remaster?
Extended edition. Oh no, extended edition came out a while ago. So I was back in 2014. No, I guess maybe not. Maybe I just made that up. I fucking love Rise of Nations.
It was cool. It was cool for sure.
You just nuke everyone at the end. Didn't work out.
Okay, sorry, I derailed you. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so like, look, games coverage. Here's actually before I get into this. Why do you do this? Why did you get a job at Game Informer? Why are you doing MinnMax? Like, what is the thing that? Because money or clout. I mean, you don't seem like a type of person that is particularly motivated by those things, as much as anyone is not motivated by, you know, even a little bit. But like with the amount of work that you're putting into it, like what is the reason why you are in this space and presumably wanting to do this for the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think it's you know, I think about it a lot. I think about just appreciating people like you, or like a lot of peers who was just a guest cohort at MinnMax for a month. Like I'm also one of those people that's just endlessly fascinated by the game industry, you know, and it's like, I'll never make a game. I know you've dabbled now, but like, I'm not that interested in that. I'm just fascinated by trying to wrap my head around one sliver of the world. You know, I can never understand this wacky world we're in or all the different art forms out there, but there's just one that I started scratching at the surface at, and now I'm 15 years into this career, and I still feel like I'm still digging this hole in the backyard. It's endless. You know, it is so fascinating. And so if I can help shed a little bit of light into how these games are made through the interviews, and at the same time have fun talking about what's fascinating about these games on the podcast, like that's a pretty good combo for me for the rest of my life, I think.
Where do you think you are then with, I guess, you mentioned it a few minutes ago about how, you know, you are MinnMax, and I would say the same thing, is one of the biggest sort of, I don't know, we're making a distinction here between a sort of generalist games coverage outlet and, say, a YouTuber, right? And perhaps in many people's eyes there isn't a distinction. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. But when I look at the space as it exists now, it's obviously like, you know, with Game Informer shelving, that was kind of the nail in the coffin in the world of print, obviously. Sites like GameSpot and IGN are still producing work, but it feels very much like we're in the sort of the autumn of the world of video game websites, at least at the moment. And even YouTube, you're seeing a lot of like even the Skill Up, for instance, is doing a similar thing where they're, he's doing more stuff, doing more, like weirdly, it's more traditional game preview stuff. You know what I mean? It does feel like, and this is part of my calculus with Noclip Crew as well, and also sort of, I miss that world. It does feel like there is a big, huge gap that is only getting bigger in the world of games coverage for the type of generalist. I know it hasn't worked out for a lot of people. A lot of that business is failing, but it also does seem like at a certain point, the crown has got to have to be passed to somebody, or numerous people. What do you make of, I guess, because it seems like MinnMax is definitely approaching that sort of direction, but obviously, modestly, because as you said, similar to us, you're a one full-time, sort of situation with a bunch of contractors. Yeah. What is your sort of, what do you make of the landscape as it is at the moment, and what do you sort of expect it to look like in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, no, it's terrifying. Like, I think starting MinnMax, I've just been so focused on sustainability, and it's always a thing of like, okay, it's the challenge. We hinted at a little bit earlier of trying to budget with a community supported outlet. It's like this number can fluctuate all over the place. So what is this safety net? What is the concrete number that we can budget out what to do with? And it's like, it's tough to do if it's moving all over the place. So, I'm just obsessed with how do we stay sustainable? And it has freaked me out. Again, also because like knowing the numbers of how much we get per ad and how much YouTube revenue and stuff like that. And then I look around at other sites and I'm like, this doesn't make sense. The math is
100%.
The math is not here. And so at that point, you just realize like, oh, we're on the ultimate house of cards. Like so many of these sites, very sadly, to be clear, are going to be going down, I think, within the next couple of years, because it's just, there's nothing holding it up. And you go to some place like Summer Game Fest, which is awesome, but it just feels like this Shangri-La that's been made for outlets based on a model of 10 years ago. And it's like, it's awesome that Keely and I8bit and the crew, that they can create this experience for everybody. But at the same time, I look around and it just freaks me out if it's like, hey, raise your hand if you feel like your outlet is on solid financial ground. Like, I don't know how many people are out there like that. It's pretty scary. And so
raise your hand if you're surprised that your outlet is still up.
Exactly.
If a year ago you would have said you'd be here in a year.
Right.
And everyone hands you up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it is that distinction that's tricky, and PR struggles with it. I get it, of who's an influencer, who's an outlet. And like in my mind, I've always wanted MinnMax to be an outlet like Game Informer. It goes back to One Up Yours was my first real video game podcast that I fell in love with. Obviously love the Bombcast and stuff too. Not that it's a clear rivalry, but and so the idea of like, oh, I just always loved having a podcast represent an outlet, having like the go-to podcast, like this is the summary of everything that's going on at this outlet. And so that's kind of been the model for MinnMax here. And so it is weird, though, to try and pitch yourself as, no, we're a real gaming outlet, I swear. It's just we're kind of in that community-funded thing. But if you're letting Kinda Funny through the door, we're like a younger brother of them, maybe. And so it's a tough thing to try and get out there. But like, we have such a weird model of, me hosting the main podcast, the MinnMax Show, and then also, being the video editor for this stuff, and running the business stuff and all that. But my feeling is like, I wish more outlets popped up that were, this is so self-indulgent, so forgive me, but we're like modeled a bit like ours. Like I feel like this structure works well. And so much of it comes down to the team that we got together of like, the 8 other people involved with MinnMax. They all have so much other stuff going on that it's a weird thing that's kind of the way it works. It's like Jacob Geller is primarily focusing on his YouTube channel, obviously, but then he's
And doing talks in Scandinavia.
Yeah, exactly. You're flown around the world for his brilliance. But then the nice thing is hopefully MinnMax is just that place where he gets to talk with other people in a lighthearted group, and it's a couple hours a week, and hopefully it's a fun experience for him. And so we just have that structure where we kind of have that pocket for all these different people, where we're the fun thing on the side for everybody, and hopefully we can pay them well and they stay happy. But at the same time, it's like, could this work for other outlets? I would love if another outlet popped up and tried to mirror that structure of kind of one person full time. And then as long as people weren't being enraged at the fact that they're staying part-time contractors, I think that's a model that could work, and it's been sustainable enough for us that I'd love to see more people try it instead of just getting out of the games press altogether.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I think that was sort of what the end answer for Noclip Crew was in my head. Yeah. But the problem was that to do it, it would have been setting up a second Patreon, a second thing. Yep. My toes curl. Like it's because it's not fair. It doesn't match with Noclip's mission. Like they're very different things and paces, and I don't want to turn Noclip into something that, it wouldn't make sense if we had these. Everything that goes up on that channel needs to have been sort of blood, sweat, and teared over in a way that you don't do with that type of stuff, because you need to get it out, and that's not what its utility is, and that's not why it's fun to make either. Like that, I enjoyed, and I think the rest of the guys enjoyed doing the Noclip Crew stuff a lot because it was a totally different pace to what we're usually doing, and it was a really cool place. But maybe that's my fault at the end of it, is that I just couldn't grit my teeth and ask again. Asking is hard. I'm bad at asking. That's why we're so bad at asking for patrons, and we have this like very good it goes down, but it goes down very slowly,
right? And
then when we ask, it shoots back up again, and I think I think I'm bad at doing that side of it entirely.
The asking, because remember at some point, I think it was like with a little mini relaunch y'all were doing years ago, you emailed every former supporter, right? With like a custom video about it.
So what did I do? I think I did. Oh yeah, because on the DM on Patreon, you can DM everyone, and unfortunately, people can't opt out of that, so I don't use it very often. Because I once had a guy respond, like I think he didn't like my politics or something, and was like, "You fucking piece of shit, don't message me again." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. Patreon doesn't let you unsubscribe. You're with me forever, motherfucker. Change your account, change your login." I don't know.
Oh, God.
I felt really bad. He was really mean to me, but I felt really bad for him because I was like, "Yeah, I'd hate getting spam from somebody I thought was a piece of shit too." I think I put out a video that was like. Yeah, it was like an unlisted YouTube video or something.
Yeah, like you're an old supporter, come on back, please. And I remember looking at that because I'm a dork for this stuff. And it's like, yeah, that was a big spike for you guys when you just sent out that message to everybody.
And we did have a lot of people come back as well. It's hard though, because you're like, fuck, man. What was the worst job you had? What was that? What was the least shittiest paid worst job?
Did you have any bad ones? Grocery store during high school. Yeah.
I think about, in my head, whenever I think about anyone who's a patron of ours, and it's obviously not the case because you've got folks we have a lot of game developers, we have a lot of like people who are very independently successful, and I see their names and I know who they are, or you can just tell by the way in which you interact with them on the Discord or in the messages or whatever. But whenever I'm asking anyone, I'm sitting here in a house in Northern California. I have, I had emergency surgery last year that I was able to pay for out of pocket because my insurance didn't cover much of it at all. And I think about when the first 30 years of my life and how no money I have when I was in London or when I moved to San Francisco, and I go, nah, fuck it. Like I'll pay for that thing.
Yeah.
But ultimately I think who does pay for it, who's probably in the middle of that equation, is the rest of the crew. That's the thing that maybe sometimes I'm like, oh, I should ask more because then I'd be able to give more work to the rest of the people who are on this. Do you feel that pressure? Like as you're stable, and it's incredible stable. I mean, the folks who contribute to MinnMax are, like you said, like people who are more than capable of doing and do their own stuff on the side and are very, I'm sure, creatively satisfied and successful as well. But they obviously stick around, so that's got to be a star on your lapel. But do you feel pressure to keep them sort of fed?
Yeah, it's interesting where we used to do a check-in every 3 months with like a one-on-one meeting, and we recently shifted to 6 months because I'm like, scheduling with 8 people every 3 months, that's a bit much. And so it's nice to have those check-ins with everybody. And everybody's so different. And I think a lot of it just comes down to understanding where everybody's at. But really, as part of that check-in, just to be able to talk to all of our, other co-hosts and contributors and stuff and just be like, hey, arrow up or arrow down for the next 6 months of MinnMax? Like, do you want to do slightly more or slightly less? And some people are like, I'm good. Actually, I got a lot going on over the next 6 months. Sarah Podzorsky just launched Fields of Mysteria. That's an example where she's like, I really got to focus on that as we're getting that out the door for the early access version here. So she's like, slight arrow down. And other people are like, you know what? Actually, it's going to be a lot of flexibility, slight arrow up. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think if there are those examples. I don't know. This is getting in the weeds even for our conversation, Danny. But it's interesting because like my pitch.
We're an hour and 20 minutes into a podcast. The people who are listening are into it.
But like my pitch for them for a lot of those check-in meetings is that idea of like, I'm wary about setting up big new shows that we are paying for, because if that number changes in a big way on Patreon, it's scary. But because we run it pretty conservatively financially, like we're still gaining a little bit in the bank, and that pays for travel and stuff like that, pays for those pancakes for the rapid fire planning meetings. Because we go nuts on those pancakes, Danny, you wouldn't believe it.
Well, Minneapolis is cold, right? So,
that's right. Stack it up.
You have to heat them up more.
That's right. That's how it works. But as part of that, it's like, if you ever have like a big idea, if you ever want to do like a one-off, if you ever want to visit every independent studio in Alabama, I don't know, it's just some nonsensical.
Fuck, I wish there was an independent studio in Alabama.
There's got to be some cool indies in Alabama. Come on. Well, we're saving that for Alamax. That's going to be coming soon. Look forward to it. But anyways, the point is like, I pitched that as like, if there's like a big one-off, I'm more than happy to like make sure you're well paid for it. And it's something that if we have that build up in the bank, that'd be easy to do. And then it's also not going to stress us out for like, we need to keep this rolling forever. And that's slowly going to drain. If the numbers change, if ads drop out of the podcast for some reason, it's going to have a real impact on us. And so that's kind of the sweet spot, I think, in terms of quote unquote, keeping the contributors fed. A lot of them are in that camp though of like, I'm happy doing a couple hours a week here and there. And, the part I'm kind of jealous of them for is hopefully I message just enough, but it's like, if you guys need to like check out for a month, if you're feeling a little burned out, thankfully there's 9 of us. And so the community in theory wouldn't even really notice in a big way if like you just kind of wanted to slink back in the shadows and kind of recharge your batteries for a bit. And so, hopefully we're flexible enough where they're doing well. But everybody has so much going on. I mean, I mentioned her a couple times, but Haley McLean, she's up in Halifax and she's like a video game IP lawyer. And her
stuff is great.
Yeah, she's doing so much. And then it's that idea of like, and then you just come on the podcast for fun. Like this is after a big day of writing legal contracts for indie developers. And it's like, that all
she is
fun.
Such a fucking super weapon because you can like, there's always like something will come up in the news and you just like go straight to her.
Oh my God.
And she has the answer for it. It's awesome.
It's so helpful for like the stories popping up about like Skies of Arcadia trademark is getting renewed. And there's a million YouTube videos all about it. And it's be like, hey, Haley, is this bullshit? Should we care about this? And she's like, they need to do it legally. It's not a big deal. Yeah. Like,
I loved it. It was great. It was brilliant. Yeah. Because it's great. Because it makes, again, it's like counter, cultural in some way or counter the way journalism is supposed to be, where it's just like, no, like this is the honest, boring answer to this. This is, you know what I mean? But it felt special. Like it felt like, oh, that's something I'm getting from this podcast and I'm not getting from others. You know what I mean?
And so, thankfully we have such a, by the way, you've been very kind. I'm not taking this ass kissing lightly. I very much appreciate the kind words there. But like, I think of the crew we have, and I'm not saying it's primarily the women, but it's primarily the women. No, but like thinking about like, somebody wrote into the podcast a while ago and they were asking about like used game prices. And I remember like Kelsey Lewin off the top of her head knew how much a used copy of Three Ninjas Kickback on Super Nintendo was. And I was like, what other gaming podcast has somebody with that specific knowledge? Just one in a million. She just knows all these things from running these used game stores. And then on top of her work at the Video Game History Foundation, where she was the co-director for a while over there and stuff, it's just like crazy resources to have in our rotation. We're very honored.
Man, oh man. Yeah, and you guys have done it. Like, I think that is one of the like failings I've had as somebody bringing people to work at Noclip, is that we have never had a woman working in anything we've done, and I'm going to give that typically depressing white guy answer to this, in that it is something I have tried and failed. It's not for want of trying, but obviously that's not an excuse I'm laying out. I would say the biggest thing, because Noclip, especially for the first like 4 or 5 years, was basically just me and Jeremy anyway. I would say that our focus for a long part was making sure that in the documentaries we had good representation.
Right.
And I'm very proud of what we've done there, because it's been a lot of work as well over the years to make sure that we're getting the right people for interviews, and we still have to work really hard to make sure that that's the case when we're chatting to people. But yeah, it's that's something I wish I'm constantly looking out for. And then I see people that you got on MinnMax. I'm like, motherfucker, where does he find these people? They're so good.
Well, the answer is just keeping your eyes open while at Game Informer. You know, like Haley was an intern, and Sarah I met at some function at the University of Minnesota back when she was a student there, and like, you know, early,
awesome.
2010s and stuff. And so it's just a matter of like, okay, remember that person was good. Remember that person was good. But, and again, this is not exactly the coolest conversation to have for two guys here, but, Janet Garcia, again, has talked a lot about that idea of it's really tough to be like the only woman on a gaming podcast because you're the lightning rod for all the shitheads. But also it's just so nice when we have, not trying to shoehorn it in an obnoxious way, but when you have those situations where it's like, oh, we have 3 women on the podcast this week. And it's just like, this. Feel free to cancel me, Danny. Women are exponential. It's like if you have like the one sole woman on every gaming podcast.
They're like paladins. Yeah.
But it's just this feeling of like, oh, the more people on a podcast with shared experiences, the better the podcast is going to be. By and large. Well, not that they need to be identical mentally, right? But just like for so many gaming podcasts where they have like the one woman on the crew, I feel like it just gets so much better if you can get 2, 3, and it just makes it so much more fun. And now when we have episodes of the podcast where there's not a woman on, it feels like, this feels lame. What are we doing here? We have such a narrow vision on everything at this point.
Yeah, I mean, from my time working in radio, like there is a science to some of this stuff, and that is 100% like part of it. You want to have, sort of a decent amount of common ground between everyone, but you also want everyone to feel autonomous without being tokened. It's like a very tricky balancing act. That's why you get like certain formats of radio stuff, and I think podcast is basically the same thing. So yeah, totally. You don't want to have somebody on feeling like there's any tokenism going on, because then they sort of fit a role, and it might just be one that they've imagined in their head, or it might be one that is coming from the audience, but it basically batters them into a sort of a corner, which is also like the opposite of what you want to do.
Right. We I appreciate you noticing the slow growth from MinnMax here. I feel like there's kind of an elephant in the room that we talked about privately that we haven't really talked about here, where something that I've felt really thankful for that we've been able to do is we do game code giveaways quite frequently to like boost the numbers.
This,
and it's really worked out well for us. And it's, I'm happy to talk about any of the questionable aspects of it, because there's a way you could do this that would really suck. That would be really gross. But hopefully it's not the way we do it, where, if there's a game that has released that we think is cool, but just we can see from the number of Steam reviews that just like it's not getting out there. Like Arco was a good example from last year, right?
Right, yeah.
Or even like 1,000 Times Resist when that game first came out.
Yes, it subsequently had in December something happened and it sort of shot up. But I'm totally with you. That was a slow boil for sure, which you don't often see at the moment. These games that do slowly boil, they tend to launch or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess like Hollow Knight is another example, I suppose. I don't think 1,000 Times Resist is getting to Hollow Knight numbers quite yet. But so anyways, what we do is, if we see those games that like we all genuinely love and we talk about on the podcast, we think are cool, then we see that like, they're not getting out there, the sales aren't getting out there. We'll reach out and say like, hey, could we get like a bunch of Steam codes to give away? And for 1 week, if you support MinnMax at any tier on Patreon, we'll DM you with a Steam code for that game. And we'll message when we're out of Steam codes. No one's feeling too ripped off here or anything. And so we've been...
And you also have to do it that way because Patreon has rules about lottery.
That's exactly it. We can't make it a gamble. So we need to be really clear, like you are getting a code or you are not getting a code.
We have one code.
And the frustrating part, I've seen... Yeah, exactly. But I'm sure some people tried it. That said, you can do that on Instagram, which we found success for. Of like, if we have a big game code, it's like, hey, leave a comment on this Patreon or this Instagram post, give us a follow, and then we'll gamble it or just do a random number generator and choose one person.
You should be like, sign up to our Patreon and on Instagram, let us know, and we'll give you the gamble that way.
Oh, it's terrifying. But by the way, I'm going to get back to this, but it was tricky doing like Trivia Tower, our trivia show on MinnMax, know, because like you can't be... There's no gambling. So it's like, if you support us on Patreon, you can compete in a game of skill, which is what Trivia Tower is, but we can't have any questions in Trivia Tower be just like name a number between 1 through 100. That'd be really fun.
That's so funny.
But like, I don't know. I can't imagine anybody from Patreon
even
paying
those
attention that much. But
degrees of obfuscation away from it. You
never
But I guess
know.
you don't want to be the one who's suddenly banned from Patreon. 'Cause
Exactly.
Then like, shit.
That would be everything. And so
I'm sorry, Jack.
So the point is then we do those game code giveaways. If you support us this week, we'll send you a code. And that's been a big boost for us. And hopefully, it seems like people come back to us from the PR side of things. They feel like it's a good win-win if we're like,
Right.
especially weeks where there's a big state of play or something. And it's like, yeah, if there's a game that we genuinely think is cool, like, we did a giveaway for Dragon's Dogma 1 on Steam before Dragon's Dogma 2 came out, where it's like, if you're Capcom and you have thousands of old game codes lying
They're
around.
sitting in a fucking Google Sheets thing somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, we like Dragon's Dogma 1. So it's like, hey, we're doing a reaction stream and we'll roll a 30-second trailer for Dragon's Dogma 1 and talk about like, hey, support us on Patreon. You get this code. It's a win-win. Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess was another one from last year. It's like, it's a cool game and it's not exactly blowing up the sales charts according to the Steam reviews, which is an imperfect science.
Right.
And so that's been really helpful for us for keeping those numbers going. We need a boost. And I think there is a gross aspect of that if it's like some game that you're hyping up for the sake of this game rules and you need a Steam code for it. So you need to support us on Patreon. But as long as it's always downwind from the conversation where we genuinely did like the game, you know, and it helps in a big way, we can also point to like, yeah, this game has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam and 600 reviews only. Like it is a gem out there and you can get it by supporting us at the $2 tier. Like it's a nice way to support it.
That's your sort of your church and state separation there, as you try and make it so that this is something that that you did talk about in the past, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you then worry that it influences the game? Because I'm with you. I'm very much the church and I'm the church and state guy who then went and made.
Right.
I was like, I'm going to keep it church and state, but if the church wants to pay me to make propaganda for them, that's fine because it's obviously promotional material.
It's a
That's where my
different
brain
building,
went.
and the church is there in a different building. It's confusing. It's confusing, but I think we very much have that old school, probably raised on GameSpot, giant bomb mentality.
Oh, totally. Like Gersman leaving GameSpot, dude. My first interview for GameSpot. I talked about this years ago, I think, when they flew me out to the UK for this interview.
Yeah.
And I was living is my dream fucking job. I was like massive in the GameSpot community. I wanted to work here so bad. They flew me out to London for the interview for a position. And in the interview, they asked the question of like, what would I have done? Is there anything over the past year on GameSpot that you would have done differently?
Oh, boy.
And I fucking said that the reaction, the communication with the community with what happened with Jeff caused more damage or as much damage as whatever happened over there. And ultimately that was, I said, that would have been the thing I would have done differently. And this is how I would have done it. And it was me staking, I didn't want to work for GameSpot if I thought that any of that fuckery I was going to be part of that.
Yeah.
That was more important to me than my dream job. That then I didn't get the job. It was down to me and one other guy. The other guy was fired after 2 weeks for being a fucking creep or something. I don't know who this person was, but they got fired. And I subsequently moved to London and spent the next 2.5 years trying to get a job at GameSpot again. And I never regretted it because it was like so fucking important to me that line had been drawn in the sand and that if I was going to join, and I ended up joining under a different management administration. And I don't know, maybe they didn't hire me because I was a fucking idiot. I don't know. And I didn't know how to do anything. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
But like, so whenever people get pissy on me on fucking social media about like, oh, Noclip just makes propaganda. I'm like, if you fucking knew how seriously I took this shit, like, so in a way, the secret tape stuff was like this very difficult sort of square to circle, I guess. With figuring out how to do that without it being you fucking sellouts. And I think we've been really lucky that we've said yes to projects that make sense and said no to projects that haven't. But how do you feel about that when you are at Game Informer, you had a sales department, presumably, who was doing a lot of stuff. Yeah. And GameSpot, we did too. And you probably had lots of things to say about your sales department like we did. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. How do you feel balancing both of those things? Because that was the church and state thing within those organizations many times. Is that editorial was here, sales was here.
Right.
How do you feel sort of adopting that role? Do you feel more comfortable with it now, or has the game changed so much that it's easier just because of where we are in 2025?
I think it's one of those things of the game has changed in a big way, and we are in that older mindset. But I think in this case, I think it's helpful to have a couple of people in that older mindset of there should be some clear division, and obviously being really transparent with the community whenever there is something sponsored that's coming through. And it's like, we do sponsored episodes of Trivia Tower where it's like, oh, the last episode was sponsored by like Game Maker, the engine, where it's like, oh, that seems
cool.
like a great fit, That's a great fit. Why not? And so those are really nice when those come through, and we're not doing Raid Shadow Legends sponsored streams. Like we've never done any paid Let's Plays at MinnMax, although no promises, but there were discussions recently of like, would you ever do a paid tabletop play for,
interesting.
And it's like, I think we would.
That's non-endemic.
Yeah, right? It's like, and if it's a game we like that seems to be cool, and hopefully the community would be up for that. And so it is interesting to try and navigate those grounds. It helps a lot to have like a really great team where in our Monday meetings we can talk through any of those situations of like, how do we feel about this? The easy example is, it's not exactly a church and state issue, but for like ads on the podcast of like, hey, how do we feel about any sort of gambling apps whatsoever? And it's like, no, let's just say no to all that. And it's like, so for the main show, it's like, hey, any gendered ads in general of like, hey guys, shave your balls with this rock hard boner. It's like, we're fine. We're fine just passing on all that shit. Because that's like 80% of the ad opportunities that come through, And so it's nice to talk to the team about, how do you feel about this? And the fun thing too is like our team's really varied of like some people are like, no one gives a shit. You're a dinosaur. And other people are like, absolutely not. We cannot, accept this trip, and so it's interesting to try and navigate. But, I talked to you a little bit about it. We started last year something called MinnMax Spotlight, which is trying to harken back to visiting those game studios that we did back at Game Informer for so long. And so with MinnMax Spotlight, the idea is going out, spending a day at a game studio, half a day, and just trying to shed some light on what's happening in this space. So we've done 2 so far. We did one on Panic in Portland, kind of a postmortem on the playdate to some degree, and then one that was about EverQuest and like the people who are keeping EverQuest alive. And the idea was we did the Portland one on Panic as kind of the template for we want to make this a sponsored series moving forward. So that one wasn't sponsored, but we want the other ones in the future to be sponsored. So the EverQuest video was sponsored, and our community seemed all on board for it. And it helps that it's like, we're not going to be talking about EverQuest winning Game of the Year for MinnMax in 2024, sadly enough. And so it's like there's those situations.
You should do that just to fuck with people, just to see what the reaction is.
Wouldn't that be great just to bring MinnMax down in flames? But there are those situations where it's like, I think this content will be cool. It'll be unique. I am proud of that video. And we're able to shed some light on the industry and teach them about a corner of the game industry that they probably hadn't thought about in a long time or didn't know anything about. And so hopefully there are those avenues moving forward, but the conundrum is then a situation of like, okay, so I think where we're at now for MinnMax Spotlight is if it's like a studio profile, we wouldn't accept payment for those. We would accept payment for those, but if it's a matter of like highlighting this specific new game that's coming out this year that we're going to be talking about in our Game of the Year debates, we just would not accept payment for that. But there's probably still some of those that's like, I would like to fly out to the studio just to learn about that. And you know what? It's going to cost us some money, but at the same time, that's worth it for the insight we can share. And so it's that fine line, but hopefully we can always communicate that. And we will always communicate that to the community about like, here's where we're at. If it's going to be for a game that's going to be debatable for the 210s, which is what we call our Game of the Year debate, then we wouldn't accept payment. But everything else will be really clear that this is a sponsored video if it's something like an EverQuest,
Yeah. I think it's demonstrative of kind of like, I think like how case by case everything is. And I think I hate saying that in one way because you can manipulate that. Like a bad actor can then sort of make a case for basically doing any type of shit. But I think like, for instance, you doing those type of things that obviously wouldn't work on Noclip because of the sort of I guess the way in which the audience feels about our work, which is that it is somewhat of a time capsule that like
Right.
these things will hopefully be things that people watch in 10 or 20 years, or in my dream in 100 years time, there's people watching this stuff and that's giving them insight into the early days of this, while the earth is on fire or whatever. But and then even down to the weeds of it, of like, how do we cover this? Because you guys do so much like preview things, whereas like we don't do preview things. So in a weird way, the way in which Noclip could do that stuff would be doing preview things. So we don't do them because and the reason why we don't do preview things as documentaries is also because even if they're not paid for, there is the assumption that they're being paid for.
Fallout.
Yeah, the Fallout stuff, totally. Yeah, which like the month it went up, really, we got so much praise for being the outlet that explained what the fuck Fallout 76 was. And then the minute that came out, dead.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it goes back to what I say about like wanting to break some eggs and make mistakes, because like I've said 1,000 times to our patrons, the Hades series doesn't happen unless we do Fallout 76, because I learned a bunch of things about how we should cover games that are still in development from that.
Right.
But yeah, it's a fascinating sort of problem to chat about. I'm conscious of your time because I know you got to go in the next 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I have a question I want to ask you about, which is you've got some GDCs on next week. You guys are in town for GDC.
Yeah. I think
you're doing meetups as well, right?
Yeah. Well, those community meetups are great, and the Tempest Bar,
aren't they the best?
It's
Where's it on? This will be going up the weekend
Monday,
before.
March 17th. You don't need to be a Patreon supporter to come on out, but Tempest Bar in San Francisco, it's like a 9-minute walk from the Moscone Center. And so, Tony, the owner there, is a MinnMax fan, so he lined it up last year and like reserved a little spot on the stage for us. And so, not to podcast from, but just to, get to talk to folks, because it's going to be St. Patty's Day, so it's going to be a little bit busy.
How did you say that? Can you say that again?
I said St. Patty's, but I was just trying to charm you by saying it that way.
How did you spell it?
Oh, Christ.
In your head.
I guess, well, normally I say Patrick's. Patty's, I guess I'd spell it with a D if I was spelling it out.
That's good.
Okay,
Pat.
all right, good.
Just as long as you don't say patty, like a burger patty.
Yeah, okay. Thank God
It's
I passed
patty.
that test. That's stressful.
Yeah, patty. Okay.
Anyways.
Sorry to be a fucking Irish.
No, that's your
Nazi
job,
on you,
man.
but
And so, we'll be there
in trouble if I
at Tempest Bar. And it's going to be fun. I think there's going to be a couple developers that are going to be swinging by and stuff. But those community meetups are super fun. Everyone's just so nice. And it's those Patreon messages in the flesh of people just talking about like, oh man, you had this joke in a rapid fire that you did with Media Molecule back in the day that was so fun. It's like, how do you remember that? I don't even remember that. And so it's a great time. So come on out and say hi. You don't need to be a Patreon supporter. But so Sarah Podzorski and Haley McLean and I will be out there at GDC, and then Jenna Garcia is going for her other podcast, Games and Other Things. And so, Games and Not Games, I should say, is the name of that show. Anyways, so we'll all be out there. It'll be a fun time, but we'll be making a travelogue, showing off the event. That's always that thing of,
hell yeah.
It's so fun to get to show, hopefully, the Patreon community like a glimpse of this is what a gaming event feels like. We're not going to be all-encompassing, showing a preview of all these games for something like SGF or GDC, but I feel confident that I can whip up my phone and hopefully not people feel too awkward, but just to capture that vibe of like, oh, hey, good to see you, giving hugs to other press people and connecting with developers you haven't seen in a long time. Like that's why we love the game industry behind the scenes, I feel like. And so the more we can kind of share that with the people who are funding the trip, the better off it is.
Yeah, especially because there's fewer vectors for that stuff. I miss E3, man.
Yeah,
I miss E3. And Keely's done a great job of setting that whole thing up, and I'm glad there's something else. And I'm not shit talking SGF, but I miss it. People used to complain about E3. Maybe I was lucky. I had an easier job. I don't know, hosting all the stuff and doing all that. But every time, because I just think about all the years I was at home watching it, thinking, man, I wish I could go. And then every year I just adored it.
Yeah.
It was the best fun.
Don't you notice that is the people complaining about it? It was kind of the old timers who have been there a long time. And I don't want to use the word jaded, but maybe there's a little bit of that in there for me. Like, it's not as good as it used to be. It's like, what? This is still Disneyland. What the hell are you talking about, man? This is amazing.
How often do you rally against that? Because I find myself in my life trying really hard to make sure that I don't end up like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the whole mixing it up all the time thing, is making sure things are fresh and new and that I feel that excitement. Because I really worry about being 20 years into this thing and then suddenly being really tired. At that stage, I just think I need to get the fuck out of the way and let somebody else have a go.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I want to be in it or not,
Yep. I mean,
So
for content.
do you feel that way at all?
I think about that all the time. I was kind of feeling about that with our like Monday show that I eventually handed off to Haley, who's done a great job with it. But it was a matter of like, I'm doing this, but I was in the back of my head being like, am I going through the podcast motions? I never want to be in that groove, but I'm not focusing as much as I should be. And so, yeah, trying to get out of that. But then also, I just worry a lot about, I don't know, just kind of the lazy snark, you know, when it comes, especially with reaction streams. It's tough if you're trying to make them fun, not to just fall into that camp of just being like, this guy's trying hard. It's just, I don't know. It's just like, you know, I'm sure we fall into that trap at times with our reaction streams, but as much as possible, I want MinnMax to be a place that doesn't fall into those grooves of just kind of the, I don't know, just the snark, you know, just the smugness.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and just kind of that feeling of just kind of like, I can't believe that developer didn't think of this. Obviously, it's like just keeping that humility of like, you guys have no idea. You've never done anything a sliver as hard as developing a video game. So like, shut up.
That's literally why I stopped doing my opinion show because I did enough interviews at GameSpot and I was like, I know nothing.
Yes,
and none of us know anything.
Yes.
And like, it's not that gamers don't know. I'm a gamer. I don't know. I cover games for a living and I'm here saying they should do this and this. And then you go talk to a developer and they're like, yeah, well, that would have taken an extra year, or like, we don't have those people, or that technology doesn't work with this technology. I'm like, oh, okay, sorry.
Right. And so we're just kind of opening the door a crack, but there's a whole factory beyond that the press doesn't get to see, you know?
Exactly.
So GDC should be fun. I'm looking forward to connecting with some folks out there and stuff, and planning future content.
Yeah, what you got future content wise? What you got coming up? What's happening? We're entering spring. Spring has sprung.
Officially.
Well, I mean, it will eventually up in Minnesota, I'm sure.
We're still frozen. We're trying our best. We got so something that I've considered tapping your skills at some point, and you don't need to commit to anything at this point. But for the last
Irish accent,
yeah, definitely. No, the last couple of years we've done this event in May called Dock Lightning, which is something I wanted to do for a long time at Game Informer, but we finally got started a couple of years ago. And the idea is, you know, we all have amazing technology in our pockets with our phones. We can make a documentary. So you can make a documentary right now, Danny, not Noclip quality, but you can get something. Now, Danny, I recommend turning the phone horizontal. It tends to make for a better viewing experience. I feel like
this way.
Oh, smart.
I like to go in the middle.
Yeah, sure.
Try and like use angular. Yeah.
So
exactly.
The idea with Dock Lightning is we just put out a post on Patreon. It's like, hey, you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to know anything. Here are some free tools. You have a phone. Go out and make a documentary, but it has to be under 3 minutes long.
Wait, you've done this in the past few years?
Last 2 years, yeah.
How have I never fucking seen this on my feed?
Yeah,
this is
check it
wild.
out. Check it out. And so
we've had the idea of doing like a game jam but documentary before, but the one thing I was like, oh, it's going to take people so much fucking time. Let's not bother. But you guys are already doing it, so now that we don't have to do it.
Hey,
so
we can join forces if you want
to.
to,
How did I
man.
not? I'm like embarrassed that I don't. It's like finding out there's a whole like fucking Giant Bomb series I didn't watch, which has happened as well in the past.
I mean, the thing is, so we, put out that post on Patreon. We have a Discord channel. Everyone helps each other. If people are stumped about like, I don't know how to interview somebody, we offer advice there. Like, I don't know what technology to use. Again, we don't want you to spend any money. Just go out there, interview your grandpa about his life. Cut it down to 3 minutes. You can do that, I promise. And so the fun thing is, at the end of the month then, we have a big screening film festival for these shorts. And, they are amazing. And kind of the more crude, the better. And so the last couple of years, it's been like Jacob Geller and Leo Vader and I think Haley was there last year as well. And we just sit down for 2 hours. We just do a stream where we watch all the community's 3-minute documentaries and like tearful, incredibly heartfelt, some real goofy stuff. It is just all over the place. But no matter how good or how bad, 3 minutes, you can sit through a 3-minute documentary,
It's true. Yeah.
And so, that's called Dock Lightning. If anybody wants to partake, you just need to be a Patreon supporter at even the $2 tier, and then you can jump in there. But it'll be a fun time coming up in May.
Hell yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on that. There you go. And I'm sure we've got some little mini documentarians here on the Noclip podcast feed who are interested in that. So patreon.com/MinnMax, 2 N's.
2 N's.
Don't forget about it. Was it really because of where you're from, or was the other one taken?
No, well, The other one was there was a MinnMax Games. They developed some games and stuff, but it was a matter of. Yeah, it was like on the big list of potential names for the outlet. I was like, oh, mini games with 2 N's. I don't know. I want something to like hint at the fact that we're in the middle of the country. MinnClip. Do
you remember MinnClip? The website was like a Flash website.
It does sound familiar. Yeah.
Back in the day, yeah.
And then it was a matter of, all right, MinnMax, that'll be free, right? And it turns out it was taken on most platforms. Where we're like, you know what? I like it so much anyway. Let's lean into it. So
beautiful.
Yeah. Hey, you've been too kind on this episode. Thank you for.
Not at all.
I should be kissing your ass. I guess I kissed your ass enough when you went on the MinnMax show a couple times. Maybe we're equal at this point.
Don't do that as well, because then people think it's disingenuous.
Yeah, you're right.
And then it's into that whole like fucking, oh, there's a fucking cabal of media people and they're all fucking friends, which is like such fucking horseshit. Like we're all loners.
Yeah.
We don't leave our house and like, you know, fucking we see each other at like 1 or 2 events a year, if that even happens. But they're like the fucking cabal. Those weirdos, those liberal weirdos.
All right, we've been corrupted by reading too many YouTube comments. We can't do it, Danny, when they're complaining about liberal weirdos.
I'm like, fucking, you shut the fuck up. Yeah, I'm going to bring back my my opinion thing, but it's just going to be opinions on internet shitheads that I want to target. Yeah, that's good. That's the type of energy I want to be putting into the world.
Yeah.
Ben Hanson, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Head over to youtube.com/MinnMax. Is it just /MinnMax?
Yeah, it's confusing. Yeah,
Perfect.
YouTube is just MinnMax, but the MinnMax Show, subscribe on your favorite podcast app. It's not a Patreon exclusive thing. And then also Pew Pew Bang.
Yeah.
If you want a video game slumber party, which has been, they are releasing their 3rd episode coming up on Monday, but the first 2 have been amazing. It's just super fun energy.
Speaking of video game slumber parties, you should come to QuakeCon this year.
Yeah?
I went last year for my first time and it was the most fun I've ever had. It was terrific.
Well, how about this? How about you come to Minneapolis? Because I just learned, and I should have known this. This is embarrassing, but we have the Mall of America, right?
Yes.
There's a place for fun in your lives, as the slogan goes. But
there's a place for fun in your lives. That's what they.
Yeah. So the commercial used to say.
Things must have been bleak when they opened that.
But they have an aquarium where they have like a tunnel, like a glass tunnel you walk through.
Okay.
And they have the whole thing where you can do a sleepover and you can sleep in that tunnel and just get to watch like sharks and sea turtles swim over your head all night. So how about that for a slumber party, man?
That sounds great, especially because my anxiety will just think that it's going to collapse.
Oh,
non-stop. It's going to be, that sounds amazing.
So QuakeCon's the place to be, though?
Yeah, well, no, it's the second place to be. That weird Mall of America fucking aquarium is the place.
There's a place for sharks in your lives, yeah.
There you go. All right, folks, we'll be back on the podcast next week. Have a great week. Play some video games. Bye.